The shadow approached and vanished when they turned on the hospital lights.
Mysteries of light, mysteries of light,
the night shift
the figure
nurse
in the
froze
dark,
in the corridor.
the night
Her
shift
breath
nurse
caught in her throat as
froze
she
in the
watched a dark
corridor.
silhouette glide
Her
along the
breath
wall of
caught
Ward B,
in her throat
moving with
as
an
she
unnatural
watched a
smoothness
dark
that made her
silhouette
skin
glide
crawl.
along
It
the
was
wall of
2:47
Ward
a.m.,
B,
the
moving
quietest,
with an
loneliest
unnatural
hour in St.
smoothness
Catherine's
that
Hospital.
made her skin
The shadow
crawl.
seemed to have depth
It
and
was
purpose.
2:47
Creeping closer to room
a.m., the
304 where
quietest,
elderly Mrs. Henderson lay
loneliest
sleeping.
hour in
The
St.
nurse's
Catherine's
hand
Hospital.
trembled as she reached for the light
The shadow
switch.
seemed to
Click.
have depth
Fluorescent
and
lights
purpose,
flooded the hallway with their
creeping
harsh,
closer to
sterile
room
glow.
304,
The shadow was gone,
where elderly
completely
Mrs.
vanished,
Henderson lay
as if it had
sleeping.
never existed at all.
The
This wasn't
nurse's
the first
hand
time something like
trembled
this
as
had
she
happened
reached
at
for the
St.
light
Catherine's.
switch.
And it
Click,
wouldn't be the last.
fluorescent lights
A
flooded
hospital's
the
dark
hallway
reputation,
with their harsh,
St. Catherine's
sterile
Hospital had
glow.
served the community
The
for
shadow
over
was
70
gone,
years. Built
completely
in 1952 on
vanished,
the outskirts of town,
as if
the
it had
facility
never
had witnessed
existed
countless
at
births,
all.
recoveries, and inevitable
This
passings.
wasn't the first time
Like many old
something like
hospitals,
this
it carried
had happened
stories.
at St.
Whispered
Catherine's,
tales passed
and
between
it
night
wouldn't
shift
be
workers
the last.
over lukewarm
A
coffee in the
hospital's
break
dark
room.
reputation,
Nurse Patricia
St.
Coleman had
Catherine's
worked at St.
Hospital had
Catherine's
served
for
the
15
community
years.
for over
She'd heard
70
all the
years.
stories,
Built
dismissed
in
most of them as the product of
1952 on
exhausted
the
minds
outskirts
working
of town,
impossible hours.
the
But that
facility had
changed the
witnessed
night she
countless
encountered the
births,
shadow herself.
recoveries,
I was doing
and
my rounds on the
inevitable
third floor,
passings.
Patricia recalls.
Like
Her
many old
voice still carrying a
hospitals,
hint of fear
it
she felt
carried
that night.
stories,
Everything
whispered
was normal.
tales, passed
Patients
between
sleeping,
night shift
monitors
workers
beeping their steady
over
rhythms.
lukewarm
Then I
coffee
turned the corner
in the
toward the
break
east wing,
room.
and I saw it.
Nurse
What
Patricia Coleman
described wasn't
had
a person.
worked at St.
It
Catherine's
wasn't even a
for
typical
15
shadow
years.
cast by an object
She'd
blocking
heard
light.
all the
This
stories,
was something different.
dismissed
A
most
darkness
of
that
them
seemed
as
to
the
exist
product of
independently,
exhausted
moving with
minds
intention along
working
the walls and
impossible
floor.
hours.
It was blacker
But
than
that
black.
changed
If
the
that
night
makes sense,
she encountered
explained.
the shadow herself.
Like it was absorbing the dim light from the emergency
I was doing my
exit signs.
rounds on the
And it was
third
moving
floor,
toward Mr.
Patricia
Garcia's room.
recalls, her
Patricia's
voice still
immediate
carrying
instinct
a
was to turn on
hint
the
of the
overhead
fear
lights.
she felt
The
that
moment
night.
she did, the shadow
Everything
disappeared
was normal
instantly,
patient
leaving no
sleeping.
trace of its presence.
Monitors
The pattern
beeping their
emerges
steady rhythms.
after Patricia reported her
Then I
experience.
turned the corner
Something
toward
unexpected
the
happened.
east wing,
Other staff
and I
members
saw
began
it.
coming forward with
What
their own
Patricia
stories.
described
Not all
wasn't
at
a
once.
person. It
People were
wasn't
understandably
even a
hesitant to
typical
share
shadow
experiences that might
cast
make them
by
seem
an
unstable
object
or
blocking
unreliable.
light.
But gradually,
This was
a pattern
something
emerged.
different, a
Dr. James
darkness
Chun,
that seemed to
a resident who
exist
often worked the overnight
independently,
emergency room
moving
shifts,
with
admitted
intention
he'd seen
along
similar
the walls
phenomena
and
multiple
floor.
times.
It was
I
blacker
thought I was just
than black,
overtired,
if that makes
he said
sense.
during an informal
She
meeting in the
explains.
staff lounge.
Like it
You
was
work a 30-hour
absorbing
shift.
the dim
Your
light
mind
from the
plays tricks.
emergency
But it
exit
kept happening,
signs,
always
and it
when
was
the lights were
moving
dim or
toward
off.
Mr.
Have
Garcia's
you ever
room.
felt an unexplained
Patricia's
presence in the
immediate
dark?
instinct
Something
was
that
to
vanished the
turn on
moment
the
you turn on
overhead
a light?
lights.
You're not alone.
The moment
Share
she
your experience
did,
in the comments
the shadow
below.
disappeared
Your story might
instantly,
help others understand their own
leaving
encounters.
no trace of
Maintenance
its
worker
presence.
Carlos Rodriguez had
The
perhaps the
pattern
most unsettling
emerges
account.
after
He'd been
Patricia
replacing ceiling
reported her
tiles in the basement
experience.
storage area,
Something
a place rarely
unexpected
visited
happened.
and poorly lit even
Other
during
staff
the day.
members
I
began
felt like
coming
someone was
forward
watching me,
with their own
Carlos
stories.
said. When I turned around,
Not
there
all
was this
at once
shape.
people were
It wasn't human
understandably
shape,
hesitant
exactly,
to share
but it felt aware.
experiences that
It
might
felt like
make
it knew I
them
was
seem
there.
unstable
Carlos
or
described how the
unreliable.
shadow seemed to shrink away
But
from his work light,
gradually, a pattern
retreating into
emerged.
corners and behind old equipment.
Dr.
When he
James
swept his
Chen,
flashlight directly
a
toward
resident who often
The beam
works
seemed
the
to cut through the
overnight
darkness,
emergency
making
room
it dissipate
shifts,
like smoke.
admitted
Scientific
he'd seen similar
explanations.
phenomena
When
multiple
word of these
times.
experiences spread beyond
I
the
thought
hospital's
I was
walls,
just overtired,
researchers became
he
interested.
said during
Dr.
an
Melissa
informal
Torres,
meeting
a
in the
psychologist
staff lounge.
specializing in perception
You
and
work
cognitive
a
phenomena,
30-hour shift.
visited St.
Your
Catherine's to
mind
investigate.
plays tricks.
The human brain
But it
is an
kept
incredible
happening,
pattern recognition
always
machine.
when the lights
Dr.
were
Torres
dim
explained
or
to the
off.
assembled staff. In
Have
low-light
you ever
conditions,
felt an
our visual
unexplained
system works
presence
differently.
in the dark?
We're more sensitive
Something
to
that
movement in our
vanished
peripheral
the
vision.
moment you
What
turned
people
on
might
a
be
light.
interpreting as
You're
shadows
not alone.
could be a
Share
combination
your
of several
experience
factors.
in the comments
She
below.
outlined several
Your story
possibilities.
might help others
Pareidolia,
understand
the
their
tendency
own
to perceive meaningful
encounters.
patterns in random
Maintenance
stimuli.
worker
In dim
Carlos
lighting,
Rodriguez
our
had
brains might
perhaps the
construct
most
recognizable
unsettling
shapes from
account.
shadows, reflections, and light
He'd been
variations.
Replacing
Light
ceiling
adaptation.
tiles in the
When moving
basement
from bright
storage
areas to
area,
dim ones, or
place
vice
rarely
versa,
visited
our eyes
and
take
poorly
time to
lit
adjust
even
during
during
this
the day.
transition period. we might
felt
perceive
like
visual
someone
artifacts.
was watching me,
Phantom
Paolo
images
said.
that seem real
When I turned
are
around,
actually
there
byproduct of
was
our
this
optical system
shape.
recalibrating.
It
Peripheral
wasn't
vision
human-shaped
sensitivity.
exactly,
The edges of our visual
but
field
it felt
are more
aware.
sensitive to movement
It
than
felt
to detail.
like it knew
In
I
hospitals,
was there.
with their long corridors and
Carlos
institutional
described
lighting,
how the
this
shadow
sensitivity
seemed to
might
shrink
create the
away
impression
from his work
of moving
light,
shadows where none
retreating into
exist.
corners
Fatigue
and
and
behind
stress.
old
Hospital
equipment.
workers,
When
especially
he
those on
swept
night
his
shifts,
flashlight
often
directly
operate under
toward
significant
it,
stress
the
and sleep
beam
deprivation.
seemed to cut
These
through the
conditions can affect
darkness,
perception
making it
and make people more
dissipate like
susceptible to
smoke.
visual illusions.
Scientific
Dr. Torres' explanations
explanations,
were
when word
rational
of these
and scientifically
experiences
sound.
spread
Many
beyond
staff
the
members felt
hospital's
relieved to have
walls,
logical frameworks for their
researchers
experiences.
became interested.
But not everyone was convinced.
Dr. Melissa
When
Torres,
science is enough.
a
Patricia Coleman
psychologist
listened respectfully
specializing
to
in
Dr. Torres'
perception and
presentation,
cognitive
but afterward,
phenomena,
she approached
visited
the
St.
researcher with
Catherine's
a question.
to investigate.
How do you explain that
The
multiple people
human
have seen the same
brain
thing
is an incredible
independently
pattern
in the
recognition
same
machine.
locations? We
Dr.
hadn't discussed our
Torres
experiences
explained
before
to
we
the
realized
assembled
we'd all
staff,
seen similar
in
shadows.
low-light conditions,
It was a
our
fair
visual
point.
system
While
works
individual
differently.
hallucinations or
We're more
misperceptions could be
sensitive to
explained by
movement
fatigue
in our
or optical
peripheral
effects,
vision.
collective
What
experiences
people
suggested
might
something
be
more complex might be
interpreting
happening.
as shadows
Environmental scientist
could
Dr.
be a
Raymond Lee was
combination
brought in
of
to examine
several
the hospital's
factors.
physical conditions.
She
He measured
outlined
light levels,
several possibilities.
checked for reflective surfaces that
Pareidolia,
might create
the
unusual shadow
tendency
patterns,
to perceive
and analyze a
meaningful
building's
patterns
architecture
in
for
random
optical
stimuli.
anomalies. Hospitals
In
are
dim
interesting
lighting,
environments
our
from a physics
brains
perspective.
might construct
Dr. Lee
recognizable
explained.
shapes
You have
from
highly
shadows,
reflective surfaces,
reflections,
polished
and
floors,
light
glass
variations,
windows, stainless
light
steel
adaptation.
equipment. You have
When
fluorescent
moving
and LED
from
lighting that
bright
flickers
areas
at
to dim
frequencies
ones,
our
or
conscious
vice
minds don't
versa,
register,
our
but that can
eyes
affect
take
perception.
time to
And you have a
adjust.
lot of corners, alcoves,
During
and
this
architectural
transition
features that create
period,
complex
we
shadow
might
patterns.
perceive visual
His investigation
artifacts,
revealed
phantom
several interesting
images
findings.
that seem real,
The third floor,
but
where
are
most shadow
actually
sightings occurred,
byproducts
had
of our
particularly
optical
complex
system
lighting with multiple sources
recalibrating.
creating overlapping
Peripheral
illumination
vision
patterns.
sensitivity.
Certain corridor
The
intersections
edges
created
of our
what Dr.
visual
Lee called
field are
shadow
more
pockets,
sensitive to
areas where
movement
light from
than
different
to
sources
detail.
canceled out,
In
creating
hospitals,
unusually dark
with their
spots.
long corridors
Additionally,
and
the hospital's
institutional
older
lighting,
sections still use
this
ballast-equipped
sensitivity
fluorescent lights that
might
cycled at
create
60
the
Hz.
impression
While
of
too
moving
fast for conscious
shadows where
perception,
none
this flickering
exists.
could create a strobe effect that made
Fatigue and
shadows appear to
stress.
move or
Hospital
pulse.
workers,
The electromagnetic
especially those
angle.
on night
Another
shifts,
researcher,
often
physicist
operate under
Dr.
significant
Mandewalsh,
stress and
proposed a
sleep
different angle.
deprivation.
She measured
These
electromagnetic fields
conditions
throughout the
can
hospital,
affect perception
particularly in
and make
areas where
people
shadow
more
sightings were
susceptible
common.
to
Medical
visual
facilities
illusions.
are electromagnetic hotspots.
Dr.
Dr.
Torres's
Walsh noted.
explanations
You have
were
MRI machines,
rational
X-ray
and
equipment, patient
scientifically
monitors,
sound.
and countless other devices,
Many
all
staff
generating
members felt
electromagnetic fields
relieved
of
to
varying
have
strengths
logical
and frequencies.
frameworks for their
Her
experiences.
measurements revealed elevated
But
electromagnetic
not
activity
everyone was
in several key
convinced.
locations,
When science
including the
isn't
third
enough,
floor east wing, where Patricia
the
had her
shadow
encounter.
approached
Research
and
has shown that
vanished
certain
when they
electromagnetic
turned on
field
the hospital
frequencies
light,
can affect
mysteries
brain
of
function,
light, the figure
potentially
in the
influencing
dark,
perception,
the night shift
and even
nurse
creating feelings
froze
of
in the
unease
corridor.
or being watched.
Her breath
We're not
caught
talking
in her
about
throat
paranormal
as she
explanations
watched
here.
a dark
Dr.
silhouette
Walsh
glide
clarified,
along the
but
wall
electromagnetic
of Ward
fields
B,
can interact with the
moving with
human
an
nervous system
unnatural
in
smoothness
ways
that
we're still
made her
studying.
skin crawl.
They might contribute
It
to
was
sensations people
2:47
report.
a.m.
Are
the
you experiencing
quietest,
unexplained
loneliest
phenomena
hour in
in
St.
your
Catherine's
workplace or
Hospital.
home? Understanding the
The
science
shadow
behind
seemed
these
to have
experiences
depth
can
and
bring
purpose,
peace of mind.
creeping closer
Subscribe to
to
our
room
newsletter for more articles
304,
exploring the
where
mysteries of
elderly
perception
Mrs.
and
Henderson
environment,
lay sleeping.
historical context.
The nurse's
As researchers
hand
dug deeper,
trembled as she
someone
reached
thought
for
to
the
examine
light
St.
switch.
Catherine's history.
Click,
What they
fluorescent
discovered
lights
added another
flooded the
layer to the
hallway
mystery.
with their harsh,
The hospital was built on
sterile
land that
glow.
had previously housed
The
the
shadow
tuberculosis
was gone,
sanatorium in the early
completely
1900s.
vanished,
Before that,
as if
the
it had
property had
never
been farmland
existed
dating
at
back
all.
to the 1800s.
This wasn't the first
While there was no
time
evidence of
something
anything
like
particularly
this had
tragic occurring at
happened
those
at
previous
St.
locations,
Catherine's,
the
and
knowledge
it
that the
wouldn't be
site
the last.
had a long history of
A
human suffering
hospital's
did
dark
affect how people
reputation,
thought
St.
about their
Catherine's
experiences.
Hospital had served the
Historian Dr.
community
Kenneth
for over
Morrison
70
cautioned against
years.
jumping to supernatural
Built in
conclusions.
1952
Every old
on the
building has a
outskirts
history,
of town.
he said. The
The
question isn't whether
facility
different
had
things
witnessed
happened there in a
countless
hospital.
births,
They inevitably
recoveries,
did.
and
But whether that
inevitable
history mystery has any
passings.
bearing on current experiences.
Like many old
Dr.
hospitals,
Morrison pointed out what he
it
called
carried
narrative
stories,
contamination.
whispered tales,
Once people know a
passed
location has a
between
certain
night
history,
shift workers
they're more likely to
over
interpret
lukewarm
ambiguous
coffee
experiences
in the
through
break
that
room.
lens. A shadow
Nurse
that might
Patricia
otherwise be
Coleman
dismissed becomes
had worked
sinister
at St.
when viewed
Catherine's
through the
for
context of
15
past
years.
suffering, the
She'd heard
psychological
all
impact.
the stories,
Regardless of a shadow's
dismissed most
origin,
of them as the
whether
product
optical
of
illusion,
exhausted
electromagnetic
minds
effect,
working
or something else
impossible
entirely,
hours.
their
But
impact
that
on staff was
changed the
real
night she
and measurable.
encountered the shadow
Hospital
herself.
Administrator Karen Mitchell noticed patterns
I
in
was
staff
doing my
retention
rounds on
and
the
shift
third
preferences.
floor, Patricia
After the shadow
recalls,
stories became
her
common
voice
knowledge.
still
We
carrying
had
a
trouble
hint
filling
of
night
the
shifts
fear
in
she
certain
felt
areas,
that
she
night.
admitted. Some of our best nurses
Everything was
requested
normal
transfers to other
patients
floors or
sleeping,
different shifts.
monitors
The
beeping their
psychological
steady
toll
rhythms.
went beyond simple
Then
unease.
I turned the
Several
corner
staff members
toward
reported
the east
difficulty
wing,
sleeping,
and I saw
increased
it.
anxiety at work,
What
and a
Patricia
constant feeling of being
described
watched.
wasn't a
These
person.
symptoms persisted
It
even
wasn't
after the
even a
various
typical
scientific
shadow
explanations were
cast by
presented.
an object
Dr.
blocking
Torres
light.
returned to work with affected staff members,
This was something
not to debate
different,
whether the shadows
a
were real,
darkness that
but to
seemed
address
to
the very
exist
real psychological
independently,
impact of the
moving with
experiences.
intention
It doesn't
along
matter
the
whether these
walls
shadows
and
have a
floor.
supernatural
It was
explanation
blacker
or a
than
scientific
black,
one,
if that
she
makes
explained.
sense.
What
She
matters is
explains.
that people are
Like
experiencing
it was
something that disturbs
absorbing
them,
the dim
and we
light
need to address
from the
that.
emergency
She
exit
implemented
signs,
several strategies,
and it was moving
improving lighting in
toward
problem
Mr.
areas,
Garcia's
creating
room.
buddy systems so night
Patricia's
shift workers
immediate
weren't alone in
instinct
dimly
was
lit
to
sections,
turn on the
and
overhead
establishing
lights.
regular debriefing sessions
The
where staff
moment she
could
did,
discuss their
the
experiences
shadow
without fear of
disappeared
ridicule.
instantly,
New technology,
leaving no
old mysteries.
trace of its
In an
presence.
attempt to document the
The
phenomena,
pattern
the hospital
emerges
installed
after
security cameras
Patricia
in several key
reported her
areas,
experience.
including the third floor
Something
east wing.
unexpected
The results
happened.
were inconclusive.
Other staff
Sometimes,
members began
the
coming
cameras captured
forward
nothing
with their
unusual,
own stories.
just empty corridors and
Not
normal
all
shadows
at once
cast by
people
architectural
were
features.
understandably
Other
hesitant
times,
to share
the footage showed strange
experiences
dark
that
patches
might
that
make
seemed to
them
move
seem
independently of any
unstable
obvious
or
light source.
unreliable.
Skeptics argued
But
these were simply
gradually,
artifacts
a
of the
pattern
camera's night vision
emerged.
mode or compression errors
Dr.
in the digital
James
video.
Chen, a
Believers saw them
resident
as
who
evidence
often
that the
worked
shadows
the
were
overnight
real.
emergency
One
room
particularly
shifts,
striking piece of footage showed
admitted
a
he'd
dark
seen
patch moving
similar
along the wall
phenomena
of the third floor
multiple
corridor.
times.
As it
I
approached the
thought
patient's
I
room,
was just
a nurse entered the
overtired,
corridor from
he
the opposite
said
direction
during an
and turned on the
informal
overhead
meeting
lights.
in the staff
The
lounge.
dark patch
You
disappeared.
work a
But
30-hour
frame-by-frame
shift.
analysis
Your
showed it
mind
vanishing
plays
not gradually,
tricks.
but
But it kept
instantaneously
happening,
between one
always,
frame
when the
and
lights
next.
were dim
That's
or
not
off.
how normal shadows behave.
Have you ever
Noted
felt
video
an
analyst Marcus
unexplained
Chung, who
presence
reviewed the
in the
footage.
dark?
When you turn on
Something
lights,
that vanished
shadows
the
diminish
moment you
gradually
turned
as
on
the
a
increased
light.
illumination fills
You're
the
not
space.
alone.
This just
Share your
vanished.
experience in
Others
the
argued
comments
that the
below.
sudden disappearance could be
Your story
explained by the
might help
specific
others
wavelengths and intensity
understand
of the
their
fluorescent
own
lights,
encounters.
which might wash out the subtle
Maintenance
contrast
worker
visible in the
Carlos
camera's night
Rodriguez
vision mode.
had perhaps
Living
the
with
most
mystery,
unsettling
years
account.
after the initial shadow sighting.
He'd been
St. Catherine's
replacing
Hospital
ceiling
continues to
tiles in the
operate.
basement
The shadows
storage
still appear
area,
occasionally,
place rarely
despite
visited
improved lighting
and
and
poorly
various
lit
attempts to
even
explain
during the
or
day.
eliminate them.
I
Staff
felt
members
like
have
someone
adapted,
was watching
developing
me,
their
Carlos
own rituals
said.
and comfort
When
measures.
I turned around,
Patricia
there
Coleman
was
still
this
works the night
shape.
shift on the third floor.
It wasn't
She's
human
learned
shaped
to trust her instincts
exactly,
and always carries
but
a flashlight,
it felt aware.
even in well-lit
it
areas.
felt like it
I don't know
knew
what the
I was
shadows
there.
are, she says now.
Carlos
Maybe they're
described how
optical
the
illusions.
shadows seemed to
Maybe they're
shrink away
electromagnetic
from
effects.
his work light,
Maybe there's something science
retreating
hasn't
into
explained yet.
corners and
But I know what I
behind
saw, and I
old
know it felt
equipment.
real. The hospital
When he
has
swept
adopted
his
a practical
flashlight
approach.
directly
Problem
toward it,
areas have been
the
relit
beam
with modern
seemed to
LED
cut through
systems
the
that provide
darkness,
more
making
consistent
it
illumination.
dissipate like
Staff
smoke.
are never assigned to work alone in
Scientific
isolated sections during night
explanations
shifts.
when word of these
And perhaps most
experiences
importantly,
spread beyond
there's now
the
an
hospital's
atmosphere of
walls.
openness where people can discuss their
Researchers
experiences
became
without fear of
interested.
judgment.
Dr. Melissa
Chun,
Torres,
the resident who first
a
spoke about his
psychologist
experiences,
specializing
notes an
in
interesting
perception
development.
and cognitive
The more we talk
phenomena,
about it openly,
visited St.
the less frightening
Catherine's
it became,
to investigate.
he observes. The
The
shadows
human
still
brain
appear,
is an
but they don't
incredible
have the same
pattern
psychological
recognition
impact
machine.
when you know you're not
Dr.
alone in
Torres
experiencing them.
explained to the
The broader
assembled
question,
staff.
the mystery
In
of St.
low-light
Catherine's
conditions,
shadows
our
raises
visual
profound
system
questions
works
about the nature of
differently.
perception,
We're more
the limits of
sensitive to
scientific
movement
explanation,
in our
and
peripheral
how we process
vision.
experiences that don't
What
fit
people
neatly into
might be
established
interpreting
frameworks.
as
Are the
shadows
optical illusions
could be a
amplified by the
combination
hospital's
of
unique
several
lighting
factors.
conditions and the stressed
She
minds of
outlined
overworked
several
staff?
possibilities.
Are they electromagnetic
Pareidolia,
phenomena that
The
affect human
tendency to
perception
perceive
in
meaningful
ways we don't
patterns
fully
in random
understand? Or
stimuli.
are they something else
In dim
entirely?
lighting, our
Something that
brains
exists in
might
space between
construct
what we can measure
recognizable
and what we
shapes
can
from
experience?
shadows,
Perhaps the most
reflections,
important lesson
and
from
light
St. Catherine's is that these
variations,
questions
light
don't necessarily
adaptation,
require
when
definitive
moving
answers.
from bright
Science has
areas
provided
to
valuable
dim ones,
insights into the
or vice
conditions that might
versa.
create or
Our
contribute to
eyes
shadow
take
sightings.
time to adjust.
Psychology has offered tools for
During
coping
this
with the anxiety
transition
these
period,
experiences produce.
we might
By the
perceive
end of the day,
visual
each
artifacts,
person who
phantom
encounters the shadows
images
must find
that
their
seem
own way
real,
of understanding
but are
and
actually
living with the experience.
byproducts of our
Have you had an
optical
experience
system
with unexplained shadows
recalibrating.
or presences that
Peripheral
vanish in the
vision
light? We want to
sensitivity.
hear your story.
The
Comment
edges of
below
our
and join a
visual
community of
field
people
are more
exploring the boundaries
sensitive to
between
movement
science and
than to
mystery.
detail.
Your experience
In
matters,
hospitals,
and
with
sharing
their
it might
long
help someone else
corridors
understand their
and
own encounter.
institutional
The nature of
lighting,
belief.
this
What makes the
sensitivity
St. Catherine
might
story
create
particularly
the
compelling
impression
is
of
how it
moving
illustrates the
shadows
complex
where
relationship
none
between
exists.
belief, experience,
Fatigue
and explanation.
stress.
The same
Hospital
phenomenon can be
workers,
viewed through multiple
especially
lenses,
those on
each
night
offering
shifts,
valid
often
insights.
operate
The
under
scientific
significant
lens.
stress
Shadows
and
are
sleep
optical effects created by
deprivation.
complex interactions
These
between light
conditions
sources,
can affect
reflective
perception
surfaces,
and
the
make
human visual
people
system,
more
amplified
susceptible
by
to
fatigue
visual
and environmental
illusions.
factors. The psychological
Dr.
lens.
Torres's
Whether real or not,
explanations were
the shadows
rational
represent
and
meaningful experiences that
scientifically
affect people's
sound.
emotions, behaviors,
Many
and
staff
well-being,
members felt
requiring
relieved
serious
to have
attention and
logical
response.
frameworks
The
for their
mystery lens.
experiences.
Some phenomena
But not
exist at the edges of
everyone was
current understanding,
convinced.
neither
When
fully
science
explained by
isn't enough,
science nor requiring supernatural
the shadow
interpretations.
approached
Simply
and
mysteries that
vanished when
remind
they
us how
turned
much
on
we've
the
yet to learn about
hospital light,
perception, consciousness,
mysteries
and
of
reality
light,
itself.
the figure in
None
the
of these
dark,
lenses
the
is
night
necessarily
shift
correct
nurse
to the
froze in
exclusion
the
of
corridor.
others. The
Her
hospital
breath
shadows
caught
might
in
be
her
all of these things
throat as she
simultaneously.
watched a dark
Optical effects
silhouette
that are
glide
real,
along the wall
psychologically
of Ward
impactful,
B,
and still somewhat
moving with an
mysterious in their
unnatural
specifics.
smoothness that
Lessons
made
from the
her skin
darkness.
crawl.
The story of
It
St.
was
Catherine's Hospital
2:47
offers several
a.m.,
valuable
the
lessons.
quietest,
Trust your
loneliest
experience.
hour in St.
If you see
Catherine's
something unusual,
Hospital.
you're not necessarily
The
crazy
shadow
or
seemed to
hallucinating.
have depth
Unusual
and
experiences
purpose,
deserve
creeping
investigation and
closer to
respect,
room
even if they ultimately
304,
have ordinary
where elderly
explanations.
Mrs. Henderson
Seek
lay
understanding.
sleeping.
Both scientific
The
inquiry
nurse's
and personal
hand
experience have
trembled
value.
as she reached for the
Understanding the
light
potential
switch.
causes of
Click,
unusual phenomena,
fluorescent lights
whether
flooded
optical,
the hallway with their
electromagnetic, or
harsh,
psychological,
sterile
can
glow.
reduce fear
The
and increase
shadow
control.
was gone,
Community matters.
completely vanished,
Sharing experiences with others
as
who've had
if it
similar
had never
encounters can be
existed at
profoundly
all.
reassuring. It
This
validates
wasn't
your
the first
experience while
time
providing
something
multiple
like this
perspectives
had
that might
happened
lead to
at St.
understanding.
Catherine's,
Light is
and
powerful,
it wouldn't be the
both
last.
literally and metaphorically.
A hospital's
Bringing
dark
light to dark
reputation,
places,
St.
whether physical
Catherine's
spaces or
Hospital
mental
had served the
uncertainties,
community
tends
for
to
over
reduce fear
70
and
years.
increase clarity.
Built
Mystery
in
has value.
1952 on
Not
the
everything
outskirts
requires
of town,
complete explanation.
the facility
Sometimes
had
living with a
witnessed
degree of mystery,
countless births,
while taking practical steps
recoveries,
to manage its
and
impact,
inevitable
is
passings.
the most mature response.
Like
The
many
ongoing
old
story.
hospitals,
Today,
it carried
St.
stories,
Catherine's Hospital
whispered
stands
tales,
as a
passed
functioning medical
between
facility
night shift
where dedicated
workers
professionals
over
care for
lukewarm
patients every
coffee
day
in the
and
break
night.
room.
The shadows still appear
Nurse
occasionally
Patricia
in quiet hours
Coleman
before
had
dawn.
worked at St.
Staff
Catherine's
members
for
still report
15
feeling
years.
watched in certain corridors
She'd
when the
heard
lights are
all
low.
the stories,
But something has
dismissed
changed.
most
The
of them
mystery,
as the
while
product
still
of
present,
exhausted
no longer
minds
paralyzes.
working impossible
The fear,
hours.
while not entirely
but that
gone,
changed
has been
the night
transformed
she
into
encountered
curiosity
the
and
shadow
caution rather than
herself.
terror. People have learned
I
to
was
coexist
doing
with
my
the
rounds
unexplained,
on the third floor,
taking sensible
Patricia
precautions while
recalls,
continuing their
her
vital
voice
work.
still
Perhaps
carrying
that's the
a
real
hint
mystery of
the
life,
fear she
not
felt
just its
that
ability
night.
to banish physical shadows,
Everything
but its
was
power to
normal
illuminate
patient
understanding,
sleeping,
foster community,
monitors
and transform
beeping their
fear
steady
into
rhythms.
something more manageable.
Then
The
I
shadows
turned
at
the
St.
corner
Catherine's taught
toward
everyone
the
there an
East
important
Wing,
lesson.
and I saw
Sometimes
it.
the darkness
What
serves a
Patricia
purpose by
described
showing us where we
wasn't a
need to bring
person.
more light.
It wasn't
Final
even
thoughts.
a typical
The shadow that approached
cast
in the
by an
darkness and
object
vanished when the
blocking
lights
light.
turn on remains unexplained
This
in
was
any
something
complete sense.
different,
It
a
might be an
darkness
optical
that
illusion,
seemed to
an
exist
electromagnetic effect,
independently,
a psychological
moving with
phenomenon,
intention
or something
along the
science
walls
hasn't
and
categorized
floor.
yet.
It was
What matters
blacker
most
than
isn't finding a
black,
definitive
if
answer,
that makes
but
sense,
recognizing
she
the deeper
explains.
truth.
Like
Our
it was
experiences shape our
absorbing the
reality,
dim light
even when
from
we
the
can't fully
emergency
explain them.
exit signs,
If you've encountered your
and it
own
was moving
shadows,
toward
literal or
Mr. Garcia's room.
Remember that light
Patricia's
is always
immediate
available.
instinct was
Sometimes
to
it's
turn
as
on the
simple as flipping
overhead
a
lights,
switch.
it.
Other times,
The moment
it
she
requires
did,
reaching out to
the
others,
shadow
seeking
disappeared
understanding,
instantly,
and being willing to
leaving
live a
no
measure of
trace
mystery.
of its
The
presence.
shadows remind us that
The
despite
pattern
all our advances in
emerges
science
after
and technology,
Patricia
the
reported
world
her
still holds
experience.
mysteries.
Something
And maybe that's not such a
unexpected
bad thing.
happened.
Maybe
Other
those mysteries
staff
keep us
members
humble,
began
curious,
coming
and
forward
open to
with their own
possibilities we
stories.
haven't yet imagined.
Not
Thank
all
you for
at
reading
once
this
people
exploration
were
into the
understandably
mysterious
hesitant
shadows
to
of
share
St. Catherine's Hospital.
experiences that
If this
might
story
make them
resonated
seem
with you,
unstable
please
or
share with others who
unreliable.
might find it interesting.
But
And
gradually,
remember,
a pattern
when you encounter
emerged.
darkness, whether physical or
Dr.
metaphorical,
James
you
Chen,
always have the
a
power to turn
resident
on the
who
light.
often worked
What
the
mysteries have you
overnight
encountered in your
emergency
life?
room shifts,
Share your thoughts and
admitted
experiences below.
he'd seen
The
similar
shadows at
phenomena
St. Catherine's
multiple
Hospital
times.
continue to appear,
I
vanish,
thought I
and
was just
mystify.
overtired,
The staff
he
continues
said
to work,
during
heal,
an
and
informal
wonder.
meeting in
And
the
somewhere in
staff
that space
lounge.
between what we know
You
and what we
work a
experience lies one
30-hour
of life's most
shift.
intriguing
Your mind
territories.
plays tricks.
The place where science
but it
meets
kept
mystery,
happening,
and where we're
always
reminded that
when
the
the
universe
lights
still
were
has
dim
secrets to
or
share.
off.